What's up, Ego Hackers? Welcome to the Cutting Edge Podcast for May 2023. And I was not entirely sure what the topic should have been for this evening, but I realized, given that the Ego Hacking Your Fear Masterclass is around the corner, that it became necessary to discuss one of the topics within the Masterclass in an effort to basically lay down a foundation. And that foundation ultimately being something necessary, at least to kind of explain how the octagram works, but also just kind of an area of personal growth that we as human beings should be looking at and adhering to. One of the issues that many people have is that when it comes to the octagram, you're looking at unconscious focus, you're looking at subconscious focus. And oftentimes, people don't really know the direction to take their life, basically, as a result of knowing what their nurture is. And one of the aspects of our nurture from an octagram perspective is that, at a minimum, is that when we consider cognitive focus and what it actually means when it comes to unconscious focus versus subconscious focus, the human mind has, or at least in general, has a way of doing things, a way about like it has a general trajectory that it wants to go. And we see this trajectory all the time, especially when considering small children. We've talked about many times within the Ego Hacker community how children oftentimes present as their subconscious, because it's the human brain's preference to develop the subconscious first and ultimately learn how to aspire. And as we can see in life, that life usually has other designs on our life for us, and then it prevents aspiration, and then instead instills upon us this sense of fear, this sense of dread, this sense of worry that inhibits us from actually really reaching our true potential, as well as ultimately our aspirations. And this is pretty sad. And this is especially prevalent within Western society. And it kind of sucks that that's the case. And that's ultimately the problem that Ego Hacking Your Fear as a course has been aiming to solve, basically. So, with all that being said, I think it's very necessary, though, to just kind of understand one of the core differences between subconscious focus and unconscious focus. Now, one of the things is that, we've mentioned that UDUF as an octagram variant is a temporary mind state, but the team and I have recently come to the conclusion that this is not only the case, but so also is, being SDUF, basically. It's like any form of unconscious focus is actually a temporary mind state. Unconscious focus itself is basically the brain being in some kind of survival mode, trying to deal with adversity, and it's trying to extract what it can from adversity, which is wisdom, basically, before it can move on to where it really wants to be, which is ultimately subconscious focused, right? And this is a really, really big deal. A lot of people don't realize, just how this can actually dominate your life. And it can. When you look at things from the perspective of, going one direction, going another direction, cognitive focus being something that changes on a regular basis, compared to, something entirely different being cognitive development. Cognitive development, it stays with you. It's very static. Like if you were to look at 80-20 Pareto principle, it would take 80% of the amount of effort to change your cognitive development, whereas it would only take 20% of the effort to change your cognitive focus. That's kind of how I like to look at the difference between cognitive development and cognitive focus from the octagram perspective. But the thing is, though, is that unconscious focus as a cognitive focus, it really is just a temporary mind state. It is survival mode for the brain. It is what the brain naturally does when faced with a lot of adversity. It goes into your shadow, basically, to utilize those shadow functions ultimately in order to solve the issue or the problem within the present moment. The problem is that the present moment hasn't been solvable for a while because your ego functions were not basically able to be utilized by your ego and ultimately your subconscious by proxy to deal with your life circumstances. So as a result, you became more unconscious focused from there. And so yeah. So with that being said, focus being, very variable in a person's life, whereas, it's kind of fixed or static from a cognitive development perspective, knowing that from an octagram point of view, one of the issues that ends up being, okay, so you have your octagram, we have a conscious focus. It is, we know that unconscious focus is ultimately temporary. We know that it is this survival mind state, right? We know that, we're trying to get into subconscious focus. Now, one of the things, I have said this a lot, that, when you're a UDUF, and you're trying to get some healing in your life as a UDUF person, that there's really not much you personally can do about that, and it requires somebody else to try to pull you out of that situation as a UDUF person. And having gotten to know an SDUF person recently, there's an ENTP in my life. He is SDUF. Him and I had a meeting of the minds recently, had a really great phone call recently. It was really great to be able to interface with him, have this conversation. Him and I had a rough patch with each other recently. We got over that rough patch, and I think that that relationship was healed, but I think it brought us to like a whole new world. And the thing is that like while I do maintain that, when you're UDUF, basically, when you're UDUF, that yes, you kind of still can't get out of UDUF by yourself. And this is one of the reasons why UDUF people end up establishing relationships with other UDUF people in the process. I've also noticed that SDUF people also tend to do the same thing. They tend to go for SDUF people, but then beyond that, I've also noticed that maybe it's not necessarily, the same cognitive development that matters. Maybe it's the fact that the other people are also unconscious focused, and they end up establishing attachments, in terms of their relationships. Attachments being those one-way streets that we've been talking about a lot. We talked a lot about them within Ego Hacking Your Fear. We did a couple of episodes recently on the YouTube channel talking about attachment and how attachment is actually a bad thing. You want to focus on bonds because attachments are one-way streets, whereas bonds are two-way streets, etc. All of that basically that matters from that point of view. It was interesting talking to this SDUF ENTP because I was basically showing him that the relationship, like his main relationship that he had in his life was actually an attachment. And it was a one-way street. And it was a one-way street from her to him. It was a one-way street with her to him. And I'm like, hey man, she's attached and she's not letting go of the attachment. And here's the thing, dude, you got to make sure you're doing your part. You got to give back, right? So that's a very important thing, right? That's an extremely important thing. So with that being said, you guys have to understand that like unconscious focus, subconscious focus, yes, it is variable. It changes a lot, but cognitive focus ultimately is the key. It is the key to being able to utilize your nurture in such a way where you can turn your life around from a personal growth perspective. Okay, it really is the key. Now, the thing is that, while a UDUF person, even an SDUF person, cannot necessarily get out of these octagram variants from their nurture by themselves. The thing is that they have to be working hard to set themselves up for success and not actually failure. Okay, they have to make sure that they're setting themselves up. Cognitive focus basically lights the way for healing in a person's life. It really does. And it's so excellent to me that cognitive focus itself is as variable as it is, because it's always an available pathway to a person to fix their life. Now, we know that the brain has a natural inclination towards subconscious focus. It's always trying to get to subconscious focus whenever possible, right? And even from unconscious focus, or it's always trying to stay in subconscious focus, because that's ultimately where the brain wants to be, because to the brain, that is what happiness actually is subconscious focus, right? Now, I honestly can't make the judgment for all of the ego hacker community to say that, hey, you should be working your way to be subconscious focused. I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who need to be unconscious focused or would prefer to stay unconscious focused given their situation, and that's perfectly fine. I'm not here to make those judgments. What I am here to say, though, is that there is a pathway. There is a path that you can walk to potentially improve your life and get yourself from unconscious focus to subconscious focus pretty easily. And that's one of the issues, right? So, with all that being said, how about we look at the essence of what cognitive focus actually is, and that's literally deadly sin versus living virtue. Deadly sins, living virtues, basically are ultimately the path that you need to walk. And the thing is that if you are unconscious focused, let's say you're unconscious focused, your deadly sin is being like you're pushing your deadly sin out there. You're really pushing your deadly sin out on other people. If you are subconscious focused, you are actually taking your deadly sin and pushing it in, like you're pulling it inwards towards yourself, basically. And then, conversely, when you look at living virtues, your living virtues, if you are subconscious focused, you're pushing out your living virtue to other people. Whereas if you're unconscious focused, you are pulling in your living virtue towards yourself, basically. And we talk about how sin nature is the self bending in towards the self. And, and that, while that can be an issue, the self bending in towards the self, it makes total sense, because when you consider that statement in the context of and I think it is the demon function lecture that I did years ago. People claim that it's my best whiteboard lecture I ever did, which is kind of funny. I can see that, I get that, but the main issue is that unconscious focus is that you're bending in your deadly sins. You're bending in your living virtues in towards yourself, basically. Sin nature is being utilized in the wrong way, right? Whereas you could be using your deadly sins in the proper way. Okay, so let's look at this, from my perspective, in my own life. Me being UDUF, every single day I literally feel myself transforming from I'm transforming from UDUF to UDSF. I'm starting to have a lot more hope in my life, more than I ever had. I'm getting away from despair. I find myself being way less envious of others on a regular basis. And in fact, I had tons of opportunities recently to be envious of others. And I've just noticed that I'm starting to develop this personal habit of not being envious whatsoever. And based on that habit, or that lack of envy in my life, things are starting to improve. But how? How did I actually do this? Well, I realized that instead of envying other people and using envy as my source, what looking at what others have and their effort and whatnot, and hating other people and using that as my source of motivation to improve, what I decided to do instead was to become the envy in the room, basically. And by becoming the person that everyone else envies, and me focusing my effort on being the person that everyone else envies, what this does by proxy is actually enable me to be compassionate towards other people. So if you notice, if I'm unconscious focused, I'm pushing out my deadly sin on other people. I'm being envious of others and using that as motivation. Whereas if I am subconscious focused, right, I am instead putting my effort in my life in such that I am becoming the envy in the room, right? That is the subconscious focus. That's how to use the deadly sin properly. Unconscious focus, with my compassion, is that if I'm being very envious of other people, I'm looking for people to be compassionate towards myself. And here I am going on my way to consume as much compassion as I can possibly get within my life, right? Versus if I'm working hard to become the envy in the room, I don't need other people's compassion, because instead I'm living off of everyone else's envy, right? And if I'm living off of everyone else's envy, that enables me mentally to actually be very compassionate towards other people and give my living virtue to other people, right? And that's the subconscious focus direction, right? That is the healthier way of doing it. And I know you gotta have to take that, with many grains of salt, but I personally believe, and that is a belief, it is an opinion, that is the healthiest approach. Okay? Subconscious focus is the healthiest mind state ultimately. Okay? Let's look at different types. So we got Candace in chat right now. So she's an INFP. So let's look at the INFP deadly sin living virtue, being like slothful versus initiative, right? So, she has to have this a different relationship with sloth. If she's unconscious focused, she is seeing how she looks at how everyone else is lazy, and then because everyone else is being lazy, then she allows herself to be lazy because, hey, everyone else is being lazy, so I get to be lazy too. That kind of perspective, right? And then because of that, she allows other people in her life to lead her, and she's looking for other people to take initiative in her life and ultimately lead her. She's looking for other people in positions of power who will exercise that power over her and just tell her what to do. She just wants someone to tell her what to do. That's unconscious focus, right, for an INFP. Subconscious focus for an INFP is entirely different. Subconscious focus looks like this, where it's like, hey, they have to get to a point where they realize they have to earn their sloth. They have to earn the right to be slothful, right? Which means they have to be working hard to take initiative in other people's lives and lead other people, or at least take initiative in other people's lives, basically, to get better outcomes ultimately for others. And then as a result of having put in that work and that effort in ahead of time and giving the living virtue to others, then they will allow themselves to be slothful. It's all about earning the right to their deadly sin, basically. And that is a theme that goes across all the deadly sins. Going back to my own envy, I am earning the right, basically, to be envious. Except the difference is that I am earning other people's envy, right? That's the thing. Whereas she is earning other people's sloth, right? They give her sloth and allow her to be slothful because she's worked so hard, giving her initiative, her living virtue to other people. Let's look at an INTJ, okay? So the INTJ, from a deadly sin living virtue perspective, right? So modesty is their living virtue versus vainglory, right? Unconscious focus for vainglory is that they would go out of their way to glorify other people. They want to be rubbing elbows with the famous people, hoping that those famous people would, and that fame and that glory and all that materialism and all those gains would just end up benefiting them, right? And that would be entirely ridiculous. And it's not, it's not good. It's not good. But the difference is, though, is that the INTJ, they're outwardly vainglorious to other people. Well, they are internally modest, which means they like when other people help them be more modest. They live actually a pretty modest life, and it kind of bothers them a little bit that they live a modest life, and whether they're trying to be around other people who are not modest because they're trying to get away from the modesty. The thing is that they need to put their effort in the right place. So the difference is that instead, they need to work very hard to achieve and to be, gain that treasure on their own. They have to earn their glory. They have to earn their glory, and they have to allow themselves to be glory-seeking to a point. And this allows them to be outwardly modest towards other people. This is like, Mark Zuckerberg. He's an INTJ. He lives very outwardly modest, right? But he's achieved so much. Because he has achieved so much, he doesn't have to look famous. He doesn't have to look powerful. He just doesn't care. It just doesn't matter to him. He'll just wear his black shorts and his gray t-shirt everywhere he goes, and it just doesn't matter to him. It's just not that important. And that is, him giving modesty to other people, being an example of modesty to other people, even though he's the most immodest person on the planet. And that's literally an example of subconscious focus within an INTJ, right there in Mark Zuckerberg, right? That's an example. So anyway, what is the point I'm trying to make? The point is that when you are trying to maximize your own personal growth as a person, right? You need to really consider your deadly sin and your living virtue specifically for your type, specifically for your dyad. You need to figure out if you're pushing it or pulling it, which basically determines whether or not you are unconscious focused or subconscious focused, right? These things really matter, okay? Unconscious focused, subconscious focus. And if you are unconscious focused, recognize that it's a temporary mind state. It's not the healthiest place for you to be mentally, right? And it's so difficult for people who are unconscious focused to lean into their deadly sin. I mean, like, for example, let's look at the Soul Temple Templar, INFJ ESTP deadly sin living virtue, right? It's all about lust, right? Lust versus chastity. Lust being wanting what other people have, chastity being doing the best with what you have because it's what you have, right? Well, here's the thing. If you're unconscious focused with your lust, that means you are constantly lusting after other people. That could even be in a sexual way, lusting after what other people have. I've noticed INFJs and ESTPs, especially in the context of women, stealing the partners of their friends, even. And having sexual relationships with other people's mates, basically other people's husbands, other people's boyfriends, and stealing their husbands, stealing boyfriends. They do that, and it's because of outward lust that is being projected onto other people because they are wanting what other people have, and it's very common with the deadly sin of lust while it's being in the unconscious slot, and that means their living virtue is that they're just trying to do the best with what they have, but specifically for themselves, they're not helping anyone else do that. They're not helping anyone else achieve chastity. They're not helping anyone else improve in that direction, right? Versus, the subconscious focus, which is the healthier way, where they stop wanting what other people have, and instead they start optimizing what they already have, but they do it in a special way where it's like, hey, I am going to become the object of everybody else's lust. I'm going to become... Apparently, Microsoft wants to be stupid right now and harm my computer. Idiots. I really hate Microsoft. Let me just close out all these files right now because this is entirely ridiculous. There we go. That might actually give me some bandwidth. Good. So what ESTPs and INFJs need to learn, they need to learn how to like become the object that everyone else lusts after, basically. And that really helps them. It helps them a lot because then they help, because then, everyone is then jealous of them. They're not jealous of anybody, right? Everyone becomes jealous of them, right? And that can be pretty satisfying to ESTPs and INFJs, that other people are jealous of them. And they're able to get other people to be jealous of them because the INFJ and the ESTP are optimizing what they already have from a chastity perspective. Optimizing their body, optimizing their health and fitness, optimizing their mind, optimizing their belief system, optimizing their character, optimizing everything that they have personally. And then because all of a sudden people are now jealous of them, it allows them to help other people be more chaste, which is helping other people do the best with what they have. Because what they're essentially doing is they're helping other people be potential objects for other people's jealousy as well, basically, instead of allowing themselves to be jealous themselves, okay? Jealous of others, right? And this is how they're able to, control their own jealousy and their own deadly sin, because they are receiving their deadly sin from others instead of giving their deadly sin to others and being jealous of others, right? It's actually that it's been entirely reversed. Other people are jealous of them and jealous of their life, right? Which allows them to be very, very chaste because they're not looking at other people. They're not wanting what other people have. They're wanting more of what they already have, okay? And this is very healthy, right? Very necessary. So oftentimes, people just don't understand like the consequences or how deadly sins and how living virtues actually move from time to time. They just don't get it. They don't understand how valuable it is. They don't understand why subconscious focus is so important. Because here's the thing, like if you can get to a point in your life where your deadly sin is not focused on others, but you're actually building up your deadly sin such that you're trying to receive your deadly sin from other people, this will supercharge your living virtues and allow you to live a more virtuous life, basically, for the benefit of other human beings. And let me tell you, this will supercharge your relationships in your personal growth, personally as a person, certainly, but your relationships everywhere. Like, this is the stuff that helps keep marriages together. This is the stuff that helps keeps families together. This is stuff that keeps communities together, right? Big groups of people together. Because everyone is giving each other their living virtue while working hard to basically earn their deadly sin from other people, right? And this ends up basically becoming a foundation of a healthy bond. Whereas when unconscious focus, which is spending all of your living virtues on yourself, basically, and hoping to receive it from other people, and then giving your deadly sins to everyone else, guess what? That's an attachment. That's an attachment. That only leads to one-way street relationships. It only leads to unhealthy relationships, okay? And that's not going to do you any good or get you anywhere in your life. I promise. It'll be an absolute waste. It'll be something that just leads to misery. Your misery. And the misery of your children, the misery of your spouse, and just misery everywhere. You don't want that misery, okay? You just don't. And I don't recommend it. I really, really don't. So my recommendation is get away from the unconscious focus, get away from the attachment, and get closer to subconscious focus and get closer to bonds, right? And bonds are formed when you're able to give your living virtue to other people. But you will not be able to give your living virtue to other people until you work hard to earn your deadly sin from others, okay? Like me, I have to work hard to become the envy in the room, right? Instead of being envious of other people, okay? Or, INFJs and ESTPs in my life. They need to learn how to stop being jealous and lusting after other people and work hard to be the thing that other people are jealous of. Okay? That's absolutely critical, right? Or the INTJs, stop trying to be around the vainglorious people and become the vainglorious one. That way they can, they got to lean into that deadly sin so that they can help other people be modest in the process and then end up having actual bonds for the sake of their relationships, okay? It's absolutely critical. It's literally probably one of the most important lessons that I have ever taught here within the context of the Ego Hacker community and the content that we actually provide. And this particular episode of The Cutting Edge is basically a prequel to the Masterclass for Ego Hacking Your Fear, okay? The course is probably the greatest piece of work that we've ever produced for the Ego Hacker community, and is also extremely high effort. I think we're at like 35 hours of video footage in it. It's an insane amount of footage that we put into it. So yeah. All right. Do we have any questions from the audience relating to what I discussed today involving deadly sins and living virtues? Just understand, guys, that you have to lean into your deadly sin. And unconscious focused people, I've noticed, have a hard time giving themselves permission to lean into their deadly sin. And, myself and Railgun, like, we are on this transformative journey together, getting, from U to UF and into UDSF, finally the promised land of hope, and getting out of the dark and narrow place of despair, also known as Egypt, as we're being led to the promised land by God Almighty, that kind of a thing. Like, we're on this journey together, and working really hard to internalize our deadly sins and to earn our deadly sin from other people so that we're able to share our living virtues with others, to get out of the rut of being U to UF and into a much better life, a very hopeful life of UDSF, right? And having the opportunity to not do it alone and go on this journey with somebody else in the process, it's amazing. It's entirely magical. I also have many other people in my life to thank who have been really supportive of me in this process, because like, at the end of the day, right, who watches the watcher, right? So it's been a very good experience for me to be able to, like, put myself in the proper direction. So yeah. But yeah, at the end of the day, folks, it's all about just make sure that you are putting yourself in a position to effectively earn your deadly sin from other people. Become the envy in the room, become the object of jealousy, earn your sloth. Another way to put it, know when to take, in terms of your greed, etc., and set yourself up to a position to be greedy, which is kind of interesting because you can kind of argue that's kind of a covert contract if you think about it. But, greed versus generosity, etc., or earning the right to be gluttonous. That's another one. It's so interesting how, like, sloth and gluttony are kind of similar because, those deadly sins, you have to earn the right to those deadly sins, basically. And that's all it is basically earn the right to those deadly sins. And by earning the right to those deadly sins, you'll actually have a much better future. Okay. So, yeah. Well, Candace, I mean, like, for you, all you got to do is just, again, it's all about earning your sloth. It's about, did I work hard enough that I earn the right to be lazy right now, basically, is kind of a more simpler way of putting it. So, but yeah. All right. That's it for this episode of The Cutting Edge. Hopefully folks enjoyed this, and hopefully you guys got a lot out of it. I will be gallivanting around this evening. So, anyway, folks, thanks for watching and listening, and I'll see you guys on next month's episode of The Cutting Edge podcast. Later.